I work as a security guard for a branch of a big-name investment bank in Manhattan. My job's pretty routine since I work the night shift when the bank is closed, and I've never had to deal with burglaries or people trying to get in at night. In fact, I'm not entirely sure why the bank needs a security guard at night, considering the place is already secured so well. I worked the day shift for about 6 months, and was only recently transferred to work nights when the last guy, Mike, suddenly stopped showing up for work. I'm lucky to have procured this job as I have so many fewer responsibilities, yet I get paid the same amount. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my job mainly consists of monitoring the 6 CCTV security monitors and occasionally walking through each floor, checking to make sure all doors are locked and nothing's out of the ordinary. Due to the simplicity of my job, I work alone, so initially it did feel a little eerie being in such a big building all by myself. But any sense of fear or tension was quickly replaced with boredom as I soon realized I had nothing to do. Most of my time is spent in the security control room where I sit in front of the monitors, kick my feet up on the desk, and read a Stephen King paperback. One night, while strolling through the first floor, I hear a long, drawn-out that seems to be coming from the floor below me. Having never heard that sound before, I was perplexed and a little scared. I ran to the stairs and down one level to the basement. I got out my keys, found the right one, and unlocked the green metallic door with a big white B in the middle. I stepped through the door and immediately got sprayed with a thin layer of water. I instinctively jumped back and pulled out my X-26 taser gun to point at whatever was in front of me as I sputtered water from my lips and wiped it out of my eyes, to see that it was a burst pipe. I sighed with relief, convinced that I was going to need to apprehend an intruder, and holstered my taser. The burst pipe was approximately 30 inches to the left of the door, and the main valve was about 60 yards to the right of the door, so I jogged down the hallway in that direction to shut off the water supply in hopes of stopping the leak. I'm not sure what could have caused the pipe to burst. Perhaps it was just old and rusty and needed replacing, which wouldn't be a surprise considering the state of this place. The basement, compared to the rest of the building, could be a good setting for the next Saw movie. The lights always flickered, the paint on the walls was chipping, and I swear I've heard sounds of creatures skittering in and out of small cracks in the floor. It's what drives me to do whatever I can to stay the heck out of this place whenever I can. This is one of the few times I've actually had to come down here for any reason. There are some custodial and supply closets and other maintenance rooms down here that I was briefed about, but nothing that would require my attendance here. There's even one room with a big metal door that has a large radioactive warning sign on it that I was told specifically not to go into. Apparently the room has high levels of radon gas, which results from the radioactive decay of uranium. No one really talks about that room, and unnecessary questions are discouraged by my superiors. Wanting to get out of here as quickly as possible, I pulled the lever of the main valve, which turned off the water supply, and headed back to the basement door to go up and log what happened. As I walked back, I was able to take in my surroundings in better detail. I walked another 3 feet and stopped dead in my tracks. The door with a radioactive sign on it, the one to the room I was told not to enter because it's full of radon, was cracked open. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The feeling I felt could only best be described as what the people who looked into the eyes of Medusa must have felt a millisecond before turning to stone. I just knew that being within feet of that room with its door cracked was a life-altering event. I would have immediately rushed back to the security office and called my manager to report what I had just seen, if it weren't for the sound of distant conversations emanating from beyond the door. Shaking my head in confusion, I strained my ears to try and make out those sounds, praying I wasn't going crazy and hearing things. And there it was, a faint but present cacophony of voices with an occasional loud yell or banging. I was baffled since it sounded like this room was a lot bigger than I expected it to be, and because the voices sounded so far off. Instinct told me not to get any closer, but curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly walked over to the door to peer through the gap inside. What I saw wasn't a hollowed-out, dank basement room with miscellaneous objects strewn about and pipes running around the walls and ceiling. What I saw was a long, steep staircase descending further past what my vision could make out, lit up by long, thin, dim fluorescent lights spread out horizontally on the ceiling. The quality of the walls beyond the door were in stark contrast to those making up the rest of the basement, as they were covered in shimmering silver tiles, giving off a futuristic aurora. Still hearing the voices off in the distance, and having seen the staircase, thoughts of radon exposure evaporated from my mind, as the inquiring and skeptical part of me took over, wanting to find out what was going on here. I pried open the door a little and stepped through to the staircase. The voices from down below were a little louder now, and I began to hear what sounded like machines beeping and phones ringing. The confusion I felt temporarily overshadowed my fear of the situation I just walked into. Yet as I was about to take a step down the flight of stairs, I immediately was hit with the realization of what I was about to walk in on. This room clearly wasn't meant to be stumbled upon by a mere security guard, and the lengths the company went to keep people out of the basement, and specifically this room, made it clear that I shouldn't have been there. I also thought about Mike, who seemed to drop off the face of the earth when he stopped showing up to work, and I never heard from him again. Didn't he mention hearing strange noises from the basement during his night shift the week before I last saw him? What if what he saw downstairs scared him so much he got up and left, never to return? Or what if he never left at all, at least not of his own volition? I decided then and there that the best thing I could do is turn around, go back up to my security station, erase any footage of me entering this room, and act like this never happened, which is exactly what I did. Whatever was going on down there was never meant to be discovered by me, and no matter what fascinating discovery I'd come across by going downstairs, I valued my life more than satisfying my curiosity. I quit that job a week later, telling my employer I got another job offer closer to where my parents live, since I needed to be around them due to health complications. Leaving was probably the safest option I could have made, not wanting any association with that bank ever again. I try not to think about what I would have seen if I went down those stairs, but to this day it still haunts me, and I hope that whoever or whatever was down there never catches up with me. My friend and I were staying out late that day. We had played in the dunes of the area near our home, and the sun was beginning to set. We have beautiful sunsets in our region, and this one was particularly beautiful. We had a great day of exploring, and our fun had included hunting for lizards to see if we could catch them. Their ability to shed their tails was always on our minds as we jumped between cactus plants and grabbed at them. These cactus weren't the kind that you find in southern states. They are like bushes and have a lot of space between them. We in the desert of eastern Washington, it is similar to a desert but is more accurately called a shrub steppe. Our adventure led us late into the twilight of summer, and we were beginning to realize we had better head home. On our way back towards civilization, we came across an evil-looking place. It was a burned circle of rocks and objects sitting in the middle. We investigated. One, the objects looked like a doll that was scorched, and similar to something that was burned. It was like the movie about toys coming to life and suffering from the imagination of a twisted mind. We examined it, and without saying a word, we both felt like it was a sacrifice of some sort. We knew that we should leave the place immediately. As we looked at each other in silence, we heard a noise that made our skin crawl. It was the sound of laughter. We both jumped to our feet and began running for our lives towards home. We ran as fast as we could. As we ran, we had the feeling that we were not safe. That's when we encountered what we thought was a trap. A downed power line was flickering and snapping in a shallow pond we needed to cross. It was electrifying the water that we were about to step into. My friend stopped me before I jumped into the water. We both looked with amazement as the downed power line cracked and sparked in the water. We both stopped in the nick of time, knowing that had we stepped into it, we would have been electrocuted. After a moment of realization, we continued on our way home. We were now in civilization and felt like we were safe. The streetlights gave us a feeling of comfort as we walked home. We made it safely before anyone worried about us, and we told our parents about the downed power line to keep their focus off our late arrival. They called the electric company to inform them of the problem. We did not speak of the incident again. I'm not sure why. We do not keep in touch, as is often the case with friends from our childhood. To this day, I am not sure why we were involved in this shared experience. I always wonder what could have happened had we not stopped before the pond. What was the reason for our experience? Were there some older kids watching us and trying to scare us? Seems possible. Or was there a more sinister entity working? Had we come across a forbidden altar? We will never know. I have never experienced anything like this again. I am not superstitious or interested in occult. It's true I have always appreciated things that are spooky. I get that from my mom. It is a memory from my childhood and it will stay with me forever. Let me give you some context. It was my first trip to Scotland. Me and my boyfriend decided to spend Christmas in New York, then fly across the pond to spend New Year's Eve in London. And since he's got kind of an obsession with Scotland, he insisted we spend a couple of days in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Word of advice, leave a little wiggle room because due to a lack of planning, or maybe a couple of things that went wrong in the middle, we ended up with no place to stay for a night in Edinburgh. This was not to be a problem because we thought we could sleep at the bus station since we were supposed to be on a bus to Glasgow first thing next morning. After a couple of drinks and a very friendly couple who offered us a place to crash, which we politely declined since we didn't want to impose, we headed towards the bus station. We were carrying 2 very big and very heavy suitcases. When we reached the station and put our suitcases away in these pay-to-use lockers they had installed, we sat down and waited for the night to come. To give you some more context, we're both from Argentina, where most public places stay open all night long, so it came as a shock when we were told we couldn't spend the night there, even though our bus was scheduled for 6:30 a.m. So yeah, next tip, do some contingency research. Next thing we know, we're out on the streets of Edinburgh in the middle of January. After Googling some hotels that might accommodate us and having no luck whatsoever, there was some sort of sport event, so they were all booked. We ended up wandering the streets of the city, which I highly recommend, asterisk. If asterisk, you have a place to stay afterwards. We ended up in a very quiet, almost eerie road on the side of Calton Hill. Uphill, there were a row of very fancy houses interrupted by a path that went further uphill towards a very secluded and dark forested area. Our reason for being there was the existence of a small, reasonably priced hotel that stood at the end of the road, and we wanted to know if it had vacancy. When we reached the hotel, we were greeted by a tiny maisonette illuminated only by 2 old-fashioned lamps inside of it. We rang once and nothing happened. The sound appeared to interrupt the quiet nighttime and made us very aware of how lonely and isolated we were. We rang a second time, and we were about to ring a third time, when across the window pane a withered, pale face stared back at us with a startled expression on her face. This lady might have been around 80 years old, wearing an old-fashioned pink gown. "Is this a hotel?" we asked. "Yes," she said, surprised and almost offended by the question. "Do you have any vacancy?" "No," as if she were clutching her pearls and we were about to mug her. As soon as she said that, she closed the tiny window pane from which she was talking to us and went back upstairs where she came from. And with her, our hopes of sleeping indoors were gone. We headed back defeated. Since this could be a little confusing, let me set the scene. We were walking this empty, eerie street, illuminated only by moonlight. To our left, the row of houses, and beyond that, Calton Hill. To our right, it all went downhill, so in the darkness of that winter night, it seemed as if we were looking out into an abyss. When we reached the end of the street, there was a small path that crossed and a very old, almost medieval kind of church that was really giving me the heebie-jeebies. My imagination was running wild at this point. Didn't all old churches have those creepy burial grounds surrounding them? I was snapped out of that when my boyfriend, the wildlife enthusiast, thought he saw a fox running across the road going up Calton Hill. So naturally he did what any sane person would do, which was to run after it to try and get a better look at it. We have foxes in Argentina, so he really didn't need to do this, but there he went and I followed. I'll admit, I wanted to see the fox too. The fox appeared to cross some sort of fence towards a more heavily wooded area, where we lost it, and we were met by the dark and beautiful monstrosity that was Calton Hill at 3 a.m. The sight was breathtaking to the point we started considering going up the hill to get across town. Suddenly we realized the sound of the wind had died out. No leaves rustling, no wild animals burrowing the ground, no owls hooting, and certainly no fox. The silence was deafening, and the stillness made our skins crawl. How could this be possible? We're like a couple 100 meters from the main road. And for only a fraction of a second, my heart skipped a beat and the most horrendous thought crossed my mind. What if we were led here? I quickly brushed that out of my mind, but the idea lingered. We're sitting ducks here. We could easily be hunted right now and we wouldn't even know it. Heck, would anyone hear us scream here? Another thought crossed my mind. My mom waving goodbye at us at the airport. Please be safe. Please don't do anything stupid. She told me to take care of myself. And here I am, in the middle of the woods, in the middle of a dark hill. Oh God, what would my mom think if they retrieved my body from this place? I turned to my boyfriend and asked, "Honey, are there Wendigos in Scotland?" He looked at me confused by the sudden inquiry. "No, they're in North America, if they even exist." He paused. "They have kelpies, though. What are those?" "Well, they're said to be some sort of water horse that can shapeshift into human form to seduce you in order to lure you into large bodies of water. Then they would drown you and take you away. I guess we're safe here. There's no water around," he joked. But the joke didn't soothe me at all. My train of thought was interrupted by the only sound that had been audible for quite a while now. It was deep and loud in the quiet night, and it came from the forest. No, not the forest. The exact point where the last droplets of moonlight met the dark tree line, less than 2 meters away from us. Rhythmic thuds, loud rhythmic thuds, 3 of them. As if there were human footsteps wearing heavy, really heavy shoes, the kind that have metal in them. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the sound, but the fact it stopped. Someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, meters away from us, listening to us, knowing we were alone and vulnerable. This person, or whatever it was, seemed to have waited until we were close enough, took 3 steps and didn't move a muscle after that. For less than 2 seconds we froze. This is the kind of stuff my mother warned me about. My boyfriend looked at me with terror in his eyes and said, "Let's get out of here now." And we booked it. We ran like pigs from a gun. We ran all the way towards Waverly Bridge and slept in the most horrid human-smelling hostel we found. Up to this day, I still think about it. What was it? Was it the fox that shapeshifted into a larger, more menacing creature? Was it a drunk man trying to ward us off or maybe even hurt us? We might never know, but let me tell you, plan your trip in advance. And when your gut tells you to run, you better listen to it. I grew up in a challenging environment. My mother left my father when I was very young, and we were left in a difficult situation. My father had to work 2 jobs to make enough money to pay our monthly rent, which meant he was rarely home. As a result, from the age of about 8, I was often left on my own, practically raising myself until I eventually left home for college. Luckily, I was granted a scholarship which allowed me to go to college. I spent my college years studying wildlife biology, a lifelong interest of mine. I was always fascinated by the way animals survived and thrived with each other. After years of hard work, I finally earned my master's degree in wildlife. I started looking for available jobs in my area, but couldn't find any within 30 miles of my hometown. Eventually, I did find a position opening in the town of Dallas, Texas. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I possibly wouldn't have to move out of state if I landed this job. So I sent in an application, and the next day I was asked to have an interview. A few days later, I took the drive up to Dallas and interviewed with the company. They told me they would be glad to employ me, and I gratefully accepted the offer. I took the time up in Dallas to look around for homes in the area, and I eventually settled on an apartment complex in downtown Dallas. A few months later, I made the move. The apartment was small, but just enough for a man and his bed. I lived my life happily in that apartment for 3 long years before I decided to propose to my girlfriend, Sarah. She said yes, and we got married a few months later. We eventually moved out of the tiny apartment and bought a small house. Fast forward a few years, and we have 2 beautiful baby girls, and are both stressed out. The traffic of the area was too much to be driving in every day with 3 screaming kids in the back, and the house was getting cramped. We decided that we couldn't take this lifestyle anymore, so we made the executive decision to move somewhere more peaceful. I wanted to keep my job, so we only moved a couple of miles away to the town of Mansfield. It was only about a 20-30 minutes drive from my office and provided a much more laid-back city experience. We bought a beautiful home in a gated community off of the highway with the help of my wife's parents. The neighborhood was small and maybe had 30 homes inside of it. All of the homes were lovely large houses with pretty large trees in their yards, perfect for me as a nature enthusiast. We eventually moved into the house and our kids loved it. Our neighbors probably hated it. We never got to know one of our neighbors, but the other neighbors were extremely kind. They were an elderly couple who had never had kids. They eventually became adopted grandparents to our kids and were thought of as family. Like I said, the kids loved the house, and so did my wife and I. The house had 4 bedrooms and a large living room and kitchen. There was also a pool and hot tub in the backyard which overlooked the creek that went behind our house. The creek was called Hogpen Branch, and it ran throughout the town and emptied into Walnut Creek. The river was small and was only about 4 feet deep behind our house. Every once in a while we would go watch the turtles swim around and my daughters loved it. A few years passed and my daughters were finally old enough to be left alone, which meant I had time to finally learn how to golf. Just across the creek was a really nice golf course. After a few weeks of playing, we invested the money to buy a golf cart. It wasn't the fanciest, but just enough to get you around the course. One night during the summer, my wife decided to take the girls out on a girls' night. Of course, being the 6-year-olds they were, they rubbed it in my face. I went along with it and acted super jealous. However, I was excited to have the house to myself for a night. I eventually decided to go golfing before the sun set. It was probably 6 o'clock or so, so I still had plenty of time. I got ready to leave the house and hopped in the golf cart. In order to get to the greens, you had to drive down the street and go through a little alley nestled between 2 houses. It was a short drive before you got to the cart path, which had a little bridge running over Hogpen Branch. This was where I had my first strange occurrence. As I was going over the bridge, I heard a splash. With me being the nature lover I am, I jumped out of my cart and leaned over the edge, trying to see what was there. To my surprise, there was nothing there. Unlike the creek further upstream, it was fairly clear here. Not anything like the waters of Florida, but I could see the bottom. But there was nothing there. Not a fish, not a turtle, not anything. However, I didn't mind it. All I could focus on was golf at the time, so I dismissed it as someone skipping stones upstream. I golfed for maybe 2 hours before it got too dark to see the ball. I packed up my clubs and began to take the drive back home. The pathway was long and took me a good 5 minutes to drive down. I was starving and planned on cooking burgers for myself later that night. As I was driving along the trail, I noticed a few balls someone had forgotten to get out of the sand trap. I needed some more balls, so I went to retrieve them. As I bent over to pick up the golf balls, I heard a loud shriek. I glanced in the direction of the noise and saw nothing except for trees and the bridge in the distance. I stared in the direction looking for maybe an injured animal. I initially thought it could have been a fox cry due to its distinct sound of a human scream. Eventually, a thought clicked in my head. I had thought that there was possibly an animal struggling that could have fallen in the water when I heard the splash. Though it had been a while since I heard the noise, foxes are known to be strong swimmers. I jumped in my cart and sped over to the bridge, which was maybe 100 yards away, hoping to be able to save an animal's life. However, when I arrived at the bridge, there was nothing there. I searched under the bridge and all around the area, but there was nothing. I thought it was odd, but dismissed it and hopped back into my cart. I drove home and cleaned up. By the time I had showered and gotten ready to grill a few patties, it was already dark. I grabbed some meat from the fridge and headed outside. I cleaned off the grill and threw a few patties onto it. I put on some music and sat back and watched the flames turn the red meat brown. I stood up and walked over to flip the patties, but just as I was about to flip one, I heard a screech. The sound made me jump. I flipped the patties and walked over to the creek, only to find absolutely nothing. At this point, I was getting creeped out, so I got my finished patties off the grill and headed indoors. I made my burgers how I liked them and sat down at the dining table. The table faced the window and I stared out at the dark yard, only illuminated by the porch lights and the blue hue of the pool's lights. I saw nothing the entire time I ate my burgers and sat in silence. My silence was only broken by the arrival of my family. They came in exhausted from their night. The kids came over to me, gave me a hug, and then went upstairs to get ready for bed. I sat at the table thinking, I probably looked so creepy, as I intensely glared out the window. My thoughts were only confirmed when my wife asked, "What's wrong?" I answered her, "I'm not sure. I've just been hearing things. I thought it might have been an animal like a fox or something, but now I'm not so sure." She replied, "Well, what did it sound like?" I said it sounded just like a fox, which sounds sort of like a human scream, but when I looked for whatever made it, I couldn't find anything. She sort of just looked at me, then simply replied with, "Weird." We sat there for a moment before we heard one of our daughters say, "Dad, why is Mimi in the backyard?" Mimi was our neighbor, who the girls thought of as their grandma. "What?" my wife said quietly. We looked towards the yard and saw an elderly woman standing by the creek bed. The lights hardly illuminated her, but from what we could see it was Mimi. I stood up. "Why is she out there?" Sarah said. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out," I said. I threw on my sandals and went out the back door. "Hello, Mary, are you okay? Do you need anything?" None of my questions were answered. The woman just stood there, back towards me, staring into the water. As I got closer, I noticed the awful smell of the woman. She smelled like stagnant water, a smell that smells like rotten eggs and decay. "Mary, do you need something?" My question was never answered. I then turned and walked towards the house. I met my wife in the kitchen. She was still looking out at the woman. "Maybe you should go let Bob know that she's out here," she said. "Yeah, good idea." "I'll go over. You go tuck the kids in and just tell them she was looking for something," I said. She agreed, and I went to our neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell once and Bob answered the door. He seemed excited that I was over, even though it was late at night. He told me to come in and asked if I wanted anything. "Do you want a drink or a beer or anything? Mary can get it for you," he said. Mary then peeked her face around the corner of the kitchen. "Hey, Mary, what were you looking for outside?" I asked. "Excuse me?" she asked. "You were in our backyard a couple of minutes ago. I was just wondering if you needed help finding something back there," I said. The couple went silent, then they looked over at each other. "So you saw her?" Bob said. "Yeah, I'm not mad. I just need to know if you dropped something in the creek so I can help you get it," I said. "No, honey, that wasn't me. But we know exactly who you're talking about. We call her Margaret. We see her every now and then," Mary said. "Wait, so who is she?" I asked. "Well, that's what we're trying to find out for ourselves. We do know, however, that she is not kind. One time Bob went out to ask her who she was and she just screamed in his face. He fell over and when he looked back at her, she was gone." Mary explained to me. "Where are the kids?" Bob asked me. "They're in the house," I replied. "Oh, you need to get home now." Mary told me. I didn't even question why, I just bolted out the door. I ran to our house, and when I burst in the front door, it was eerily quiet. But one horrifying detail I noticed is that the back door was wide open. I'd forgotten to lock the door. You kind of grow out of the habit of locking doors at night when you live in a gated community you trust so much. "Sarah," I screamed. Nobody answered. I sprinted upstairs to my daughter's room where I found all three girls huddled in the closet crying. "What happened? Are y'all okay?" I exclaimed. "She's in the house, the lady is in the house, and it's not Mary, Josh, it's not Mary," my wife cried to me. "I know," I said, "but it's okay, I'm here now." Just then I heard a thump from the stairs. "Josh," my wife cried. At this point, my daughters were sobbing. "Daddy, is she going to hurt us?" my daughter cried. "No, I'm not going to let that happen," I said confidently. I might have appeared brave to my family, but I was on the verge of tears. I heard another thump. I wanted to stay in the closet with my family, but as the man of the house, I had to do something. I grabbed my daughter's softball bat, which was lead against the corner in the closet, and gripped it hard. I slowly walked out of the room, prepared to knock the crap out of whoever was threatening my family. I rounded the corner and looked down the stairs. There on the third step up was a woman. The woman was staring at me. Her dress was a dark, dirty gray color, and her hair was a dark black color and dripping wet. Her eyes were black, and her mouth was still. I just stood there. I couldn't do anything. After what seemed like hours of staring, the woman slowly backed down the stairs and walked out of view. Then after a few more moments, the back door shut. "What the hell?" I said out loud. My mind was racing. Who was that? And why the heck did she come into my house? I had never believed in the paranormal. But had I just seen a ghost? I then remembered my family was waiting for me to return. I ran back to the closet and embraced my family. "It's okay, it was just Mimi," I told my daughters. I gave my wife a look, and she went along with the white lie. We sat there for a moment before everyone's adrenaline went down, and the girls began to become sleepy again. We asked them if they wanted to go sleep at Mimi's and Bob's house that night, and they excitedly said yes. We packed small bags and began walking to their house. Before we left, though, I double-checked every single lock in the house. I also made sure the lady was actually gone. She was, but the water droplets she left were not. We ran over to their house quickly, terrified of what we might see outside. Luckily, we made it safely. "What were you doing at our house?" my daughter asked Mary. Mary glanced at my wife and I, and we gave her a look, letting her know that she needed to lie to them. "I was just looking for sugar. I made cookies. They're in the kitchen," she said sweetly. The girls ran into the kitchen. "Thank you," I said. "Of course. So is everyone all right? Tell us what happened," Mary stated. We told Bob and Mary the story, and they were shook. They had seen the woman several times before, but never thought the woman would go inside anyone's house. That night, the girls fell asleep quickly in the living room on the floor. However, the 4 adults could not sleep a blink. We all talked about our experience, and I told everyone what I saw at the bottom of the stairs. I also told Mary and Bob my experiences from earlier that day. We tried finding information about it online, but there was nothing. The next day, we took a trip to the public library and asked if we could go through old documents. We got permission and spent all day going through files of papers. Eventually, my wife found a paper from the year 1907. The article she pointed out reported that a woman was found dead in a creek in town. The article had very little detail and didn't specify who the woman was or which creek it was. However, we allowed ourselves to believe that this was the woman who we came in contact with. After that night, we lived in constant fear. My job eventually caused us to move to Georgia, where my wife and I now live. Our daughters are both now in college and have no idea what actually happened that night. As for Bob and Mary, they lived in that house up until a year ago. Now they live in a much newer house in a different city. They have told us that they saw Margaret a couple of times since the incident. We can only hope that the woman is at rest now and will not terrorize anyone else who lives along that creek. I still have questions, though, like why did the woman need to open the door if she was a spirit? And how did she leave physical water droplets on the floor if she was just a spirit? Or maybe this wasn't a ghost at all and was just some jerk teenagers pulling a prank on us. If you have any feedback on what you think it was, please let us know. Thank you, and God bless. I have lived in southern Alaska with my family my entire life. My whole family has stories about our property, and I've decided to share them. These stories are spread out over the 11 years that we've lived here. I don't remember the order, so I'll be telling them as I go. I will be using fake names for everyone and just the first initial of friends and pets. The first story that comes to mind about this place is the voice in the woods. Our property is 50 acres and about 75% of it is woods. My siblings and I would spend hours out there, but now we rarely go there at all. Now I have a very large family and we all live on this property except for my 2 oldest siblings. I live here with my grandpa, mom, dad, older twin sister, 2 little sisters, and 2 little brothers. The first time we heard the voice, it was just my little sister Allie and me. I was 13 and Allie was 11. The weather was warm during the middle of June, and we wanted to ride our dad's black 4-wheeler around the trails. We were on the other side of the property having fun, and we even stopped for a moment to play in the river. Then we started to smell something bad, so bad that it made me gag and stop the 4-wheeler. It smelled like a rotting animal that's been sitting in the sun for a week. We didn't want to know what it was that was dead and didn't want to stick around. I had started to drive away down another trail when I heard Allie yell my name, "Lynn!" I stopped the 4-wheeler and turned to her to see what was wrong, but she just looked at me, confused. When I asked her what, she said she hadn't said anything. I figured it was just in my head, but before I could continue driving, we heard it again. "Lynn!" I could feel Allie's body go still behind me as she stared ahead. Something called my name in Ali's voice, and it was coming from in front of us where the smell was. I immediately felt the fight-or-flight response in me, along with the reaction to protect my little sister, and turned around as fast as I could, flooring it back to the house. I nearly flipped the four-wheeler twice and almost hit a tree. I felt like something was watching us as we were leaving. Our dad saw the way I was driving on his new four-wheeler, and I got in trouble. Neither Ali nor I told our dad what happened, because we didn't want him to think we were too scared to be playing in the woods by ourselves anymore. I didn't go back into the woods for a few weeks. The second time we heard the voice was when we were all in the woods except for my older brother. It was me, my two older sisters, Mari and Renee, and my two younger sisters, Allie and Jolene. I was 15 this time. Mari, Renee, and Jolene were on our grandpa's six-wheeler. Allie was riding our mom's four-wheeler, and I was riding our dad's. We'd been out there for a while and were racing when we knew we weren't supposed to. We were also on the other side of the property again. That way we couldn't get caught. Allie was close behind me, and Mari was in front around the turn. She was waiting for us to catch up. As we sat there listening to Mari brag about winning, we all heard our mom yell, "Girls!" Thinking Mom was finally home from the store with dinner and needed help bringing in the groceries, we sped to the house, slowing down before we got close enough that she could hear us so she wouldn't think we were speeding around. When we got there, Mom was just getting out of her car. We parked the four-wheelers and got off, walking over to our mom. We asked her why she had called us and what she needed, but she looked at us strangely. She told us she had just come down the driveway and didn't call us. She wasn't at the house when we were called. Then I realized something that made my heart race and my blood run cold. Even if Mom had been at the house, there's no way we would have been able to hear her from the other side of the property, especially with the two four-wheelers and six-wheeler running. I didn't tell my sisters about that because I didn't want to scare them. The last time I heard the voice was only last month. I'm 19 now. I had a falling out with a close friend who had been to my house many, many times in the past. I'll call her N. It was 8 in the morning, and I was heading to my Jeep about to leave for work. Purse on my shoulder, full coffee cup in hand, I was ready to go. Then I heard N's voice coming from the woods. "Help." I stood there for a second, confused and just staring into the woods, waiting to see if it would happen again. Was someone on our property? But soon I felt panicked and quickly got back inside because something about the voice was familiar. Other than the fact that it was N's, I felt uneasy. N hasn't been to my house in 3 years. Something about the voice was wrong. It was as if it were whispered and calm, not the way someone would be calling for help if they needed it. The voice also didn't sound organic, like it was a recording, but not from a radio or phone. It didn't make any sense, and because I didn't hear it again, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I ended up running to my Jeep like a scared little kid, locking all the doors once I was inside. I took one more look at the woods, and I didn't see anything, so I left for work, driving a little faster than I should have up the driveway. I loved telling my coworker all the scary stories about my house because it would freak her out. When I got to work and told her what happened, she was jumpy for a few hours, and it really didn't help when one of our brooms fell off the wall without us being near it. I told her someone probably didn't put it back on the hook properly. It seemed to calm her down just a little. Anne has been in those woods before, and she knows how scary they can be. About 5 years ago, on the 4th of July weekend, she and I were playing hide-and-seek with my family in the woods. We were hiding together in a very small ravine in the center of the woods. It was hidden by bushes and devil's clubs. I remember the devil's club well because I got a blister on my ankle that hurt like hell. Anne and I played rock, paper, scissors as we were hiding. We heard walking coming toward us and thought we were going to get caught. A rule in my family when playing hide-and-seek is you're not allowed to leave your spot. We watched someone in a white hoodie and black pants walk by us. They would have seen us if they had looked to their right and down, but they didn't. We were eventually found by my older brother and walked back to the house with my auntie, who was also found. It was girls vs boys, and the boys won. It was perfect timing as well because my mom and grandma had just finished making dinner. But as Ann and I were getting ourselves some very full plates, I realized no one was wearing a white hoodie. It's okay, they probably took it off. But also, no one was wearing black jeans. I asked my dad if anyone had changed in the bathroom or something. Maybe they had thorns in their pant sleeves, but he told me he didn't think so. Ann and I told him about the person we saw walking past us, and he was worried, thinking someone was on our property. He also didn't like the thought of a trespasser in the woods with all his daughters hiding. My dad took 3 of my uncles and went into the woods. They were gone for about an hour. They must have checked the entire property. My dad even called my mom and told her to ask me where we saw them. When they got back, my dad said they hadn't seen anyone and sat down in the living room with everyone else. My uncles, on the other hand, were talking very quietly. I knew only my Uncle Jay would tell me what was wrong, and I was right. It had rained a few hours before we went to play in the woods, meaning it was muddy. My Uncle Jay told Ann and me that they didn't see any footprints anywhere near the spot we were hiding other than us two girls and my brothers. I was paranoid all night that I'd see the person in the woods walk by my window. The last time Ann was in those woods was when her, me, and our friend T decided to go camping out there. It was the end of summer, and us 3 girls wanted to go camping one last time before winter. We were too young to go camping by ourselves, so the next best thing was the woods on my property. Our campsite was pretty much dead center of the woods. We had my mom and dad's big tent that could fit 5 people, and my grandpa's 6-wheeler. My 2 friends T and N were so excited they didn't care about the stories. Honestly, so was I, and I wish I wasn't. We had gotten settled in our tent and started to play with a deck of cards I'd brought with us. As it got later and darker, well, as dark as it can get in Alaska, we decided to get comfy in our sleeping bags so we would be warm. N and I wanted to tell stories. T didn't believe in the paranormal but listened to N and me talk about our favorite horror stories and urban legends. N and I, when talking about the Wendigo stories, would say the W instead of the actual name because we believed that saying its name would summon it. N is an Alaskan native, and so is her family. Her mom is the one who told us to never say the creature's name. T knew what we were talking about, and I'm pretty sure she knew not to say it, but she did anyway. What exactly is the Wendigo? T asked us. Ann and I whipped our heads in her direction, and I shouted that you should never say that word out loud. T only rolled her eyes and laughed. She wouldn't have been laughing if she knew what awaited us. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning when Ann woke me up. She whispered to me that she'd been awake for maybe an hour and she could hear something walking around. My dad let me bring my mom's pistol with us after we promised to be very careful with it, and that I'd be the only one to touch it unless absolutely necessary. I kept it near my sleeping bag. I was on the left side of the tent. N was in the middle, and I could see T was still asleep on the right side. N was a very light sleeper and was woken up by T's snoring. She was trying to go back to sleep when she heard something. I listened carefully and I could hear something walking around. It wasn't very close, but it was close enough that we needed to pay attention. I thought it was maybe a moose, bear, or something else. That was quickly shut down when I realized it sounded like it was on 2 legs, not 4 like I was expecting. N reached over and shook T awake, putting her finger over her mouth to show T to be quiet. Then N pointed to her ears. T listened and looked at us confused. I shrugged my shoulders, showing I had no idea what it was. I kept my hand on my mom's pistol just in case. I got out my phone and I saw that it was about 2:30 a.m. I texted both my mom and dad saying that I could hear something walking around our campsite. They didn't respond. I wasn't surprised because it was past midnight and my mom had just had my baby brother the week before. We listened as it got closer to our tent. We were now scared some animal was going to rip a hole in our tent and get us. It was getting closer to my side, so as quietly as we could, N and I scooted closer to T. Then we could smell it. It smelled so much like BO that I could almost taste it. T covered the bottom of her face with her blanket, and N was covering her nose with her hand. N looked to T and mouthed something that I couldn't see, but I could see the fear in T's eyes. Later, I found out N had mouthed the word Wendigo to her. We stayed quiet out of fear. We refused to even move. Even breathing felt too loud. We didn't want to let the thing outside know we were in the tent. Whatever was out there felt evil. I tried to listen as close as I could, but it was hard because my heart was beating so loud. I'm pretty sure N and T could hear it. The sound of walking went around and stopped near the front of our tent. I was ready to shoot whatever it was through the tent. It was only a few seconds of silence, but it felt like hours. Then we heard the sound of a gunshot. We all jumped and N gasped. It was loud and I knew who it was. Our neighbor had a large collection of shotguns and would have target practice almost every day. I don't know what my neighbor was shooting at in the middle of the night, but I believe he saved our lives that night. He wasn't close enough to be shooting at the thing outside our tent or even know that us girls were camping out there. We could hear the thing run past us and toward the river, away from us, my house and our neighbor. It was fast. We sat there for a long minute, huddled together on one side of the tent, shaking. N asked in a hushed voice if we should go back to the house, but I was too afraid to leave the tent. I was scared the sound of the six-wheeler would bring it back, and I didn't want to leave all of our stuff out here. So we just went back to sleep. We were pressed tight against each other. I don't think we could have been closer, and I'm not sure if N really did sleep that night. The next morning, when we had the courage to leave the tent, we could see small moose prints around our tent. I tried to ignore the fact that it looked like it was standing on two legs, and I just hoped it was a curious baby moose. N and T came to my house a bunch after that, but we never camped in the woods again. T and I still go camping together, but we make sure to go somewhere else. That wasn't the only time T experienced something here. One day when T was staying over, she woke me up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure when this was, but I believe sometime near Christmas. She was sleeping on my bed and I was on the floor. It only took me a few seconds to realize why she'd woken me up. I could hear light tapping on my window. I looked up where I thought T's face was. Now I live in the basement of my house. Half my room is underground and the top half is on ground level. There are no trees or bushes near my window, so it couldn't be a branch, and 1/3 of my window was covered by snow. It was in the winter and completely dark. The tapping lasted about another 30 seconds. T and I were just holding each other's hand, trying not to freak out. T was obviously more freaked out because she'd been awake longer. I'm not sure who it was, but someone turned on the light in the upstairs bathroom, illuminating the backyard and my room. The tapping immediately stopped. I didn't want to move, but I needed to take advantage of the light. I stood up on my bed near T's feet and looked out the window. At first I didn't see anything until I looked a little harder. In the woods across the river, I thought I saw a tall person standing in the tree line. They were thin with long arms and legs. Their skin was almost white. I hope it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and it was just a strange-looking tree. But when I look out my window now at that same spot, I see nothing like I did that night. No tree out there looks even a little bit like that thing. After making sure my window was locked, I got off the bed and went to sleep, trying to forget about the tapping and the tall creature. Recently, my mom and I will hear whistling coming from behind our house across the river, like something is trying to get our attention. Every time I hear it, I am reminded of that creature and the time with Mari. Mari, Renee, and I were riding our grandpa's six-wheeler. It was early spring, and the ice on the river was finally gone. We were behind the house at the end of the property. We were driving around and having fun when Mari randomly went quiet. Renee and I only noticed when she started to cry and panic. When we asked what was wrong, she wouldn't tell us. She sped to the house and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. Our mom thought we made her mad and we got in trouble. Mari kept it to herself for months and Renee and I forgot about it. I remembered that moment when writing this and gave Mari a call. I asked her what she saw that day, and with a heavy sigh, Mari finally told me. Mari saw a very thin creature watching us from behind a tree. It was tall and pale. It almost looked like one of the birch trees near it. It was standing perfectly still with long arms, just watching us. When it noticed Mari looking at it, she swore it smiled at her. Its teeth were sharp and yellow. Mari was only able to look away when it slowly hid back behind the tree. Even writing this right now, I had to get up and make sure my window is locked. I know what skinwalkers and wendigos are, and I believe something like them is in our woods. I don't think it can leave the property or come into the house. but that doesn't mean our house is safe. Ever since we moved in 11 years ago, strange things have been happening inside. One day my little sisters Allie and Jolene ran up the stairs and into the living room, nearly tripping over each other. They said they were cleaning out the closet and watched the garage door close shut on its own. I tried convincing myself that it was just a gust of wind or the tilt of the house, but I know you can't shut that door without using all of your body weight. Both my mom and dad have heard light footsteps running up and down the basement hallway when none of us kids are home. Us girls will hear creaking like someone is walking in our parents' room when they are both at work. When Renee and I were 15, we built a wall down the middle of our older brother's room after he moved out and put a new door in the hallway. Our rooms have always been strange, even when it was Thomas's room. When Renee was staying at a friend's house, I heard and recorded knocking coming from her side of our shared wall. I went to Renee's room to see if there was something on her wall, but all that was there were her hoodies on the rack. My older brother has always been able to see things others can't. When Thomas was living here at the house, he lived in the basement. Thomas told me about 3 spirits he'd see in his room. 2 men that would argue all day, and at night one would be sobbing in the closet. And a little girl he would see in his room. She looked like she was about 5 or 6 years old and wore a purple sundress. He said she would just stand in the corner of his room near the door and stare at him, not doing anything. He called her Sally. Sally was on my side of the room, which meant I was the one who had to deal with her. When I told Thomas about things in my room moving and hearing knocking and scratching on my door where he'd seen Sally, he told me Sally seemed more active after I moved into the room. Now, I should mention I had a rag doll named Cinnamon, and she actually has her own story that I'll tell after Sally's. Cinnamon would sit on the left side of my dresser under my loft bed. Sally took a huge liking to Cinnamon and would try to play with her at night when I wouldn't be interrupting. I'd wake up in the morning to Cinnamon facing a different direction or find her on the floor. Things would move around Cinnamon as well, like my guitar or longboard falling, or a drawer being opened when I wasn't in the room. I had enough of it and put Cinnamon in the garage, and my dad ended up moving her to the Connex we have on the property. I haven't had anything happen in my room since then, but stuff still happens outside my window. Now for the story about Cinnamon herself. I named my rag doll Cinnamon because that's what it said on her apron. Cinnamon had red hair, black eyes, rosy cheeks, a cute white dress with red polka dots and a white apron. Cinnamon was given to me as a Christmas present by my aunt when I was 4. That same Christmas, I had an allergic reaction that almost killed me. What did I have an allergic reaction to? The cinnamon in the gingerbread cookies my grandma made. I am still severely allergic to cinnamon. Not just eating it, but touching it will cause hives and rashes on my skin, and cinnamon-scented things have caused me to have breathing problems. It's honestly pretty dangerous for me during the holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. Almost everything has cinnamon in or on it. I believe that doll is evil, and with Sally attached to it, it might be worse or a little better. I'm not the only one in my family to have a rag doll. Renee once had one, and no matter what she did, she'd find that doll under her bed every morning. Even when Renee and I had to share a room, and even when we had to share a bed for a year, it would end up under her bed. Renee lost it when she was 10. We could never find it, and when we asked, no one knew where it was. Renee had named her rag doll Boogie Woogie. I asked my siblings what stories I should mention here, and Jolene told me to share the one with the moose. Jolene and I were the only ones home that day. Now, Renee, Ali, and I all have dogs that will bark at anything and everything. If they see a moose, they lose their little minds barking. We heard Kay, Ali's dog, bark only twice. Jolene went to look at what he was barking at and saw the backside of a baby moose. I went upstairs to my parents' balcony to pay attention to the baby and keep an eye out for its mother in case she got too close to the dogs. When I got up there, I couldn't see it, but all 3 dogs were staring into the woods. They were all on edge. C, my dog, is a very large husky and has never cowered away from anything but fireworks and me when he's in trouble, and to see him scared meant something was seriously wrong. I got my dad's binoculars and tried to find the baby moose. Jolene had now joined me on the balcony and we couldn't find it, so we decided to get in my Jeep and drive over to where Jolene originally saw it. Lazy, I know, but I didn't feel like walking around in my PJs outside. Jolene got out with the binoculars and walked up the hill. She stood up there for about a minute before saying, Lynn, come here, something's wrong. I got out and joined her at the top of the hill. I could see the baby moose now. It wasn't moving. I took the binoculars from Jolene and looked for the moose. She was right. Something was very wrong. This moose was not okay. It had the features of a full-grown female, but it was the size of a baby. Its neck was too long and thick. Its eyes were too big, and it was just staring at us. It took one step toward us, and I knew we needed to run. The way it walked was messed up. It brought its leg all the way up until it touched its stomach, then put it back down and stepped closer. I grabbed Jolene's arm and pulled her down the hill and into my Jeep. Then I could smell it, the smell of a rotting animal. Jolene was gagging and nearly threw up, and I'm glad she didn't because she would have refused to open the Jeep door. I parked as close as I could to the front door of the house and ran inside with Jolene. We called our dad and told him what happened, but he didn't think it was anything serious. He also joked that it was a skinwalker at dinner. I felt a ping of fear every time he said skinwalker. In the summer before fall, my mom, sisters, and I will clean up any garbage on our property next to the road. We stop when we reach the cliff overlooking the woods. Last year, Allie spotted a jar, and when she took a closer look, she saw it was a jar of dead bees. Allie called me over to show me, but then we noticed all the strange things about it. It was on the edge of the cliff, perfectly placed. The grass under it showed it had been there for a long time. How did we never see it? There was no lid on the jar, and there was nothing but bees in it. And I mean nothing. No dirt, no leaves, no other bugs. How could it sit there for so long and have nothing else in it? Allie and I got a weird vibe and decided to leave it alone. I got rid of it this year when I told a coworker this story, and she told me it could have been something used for witchcraft. The strange thing about it was that there were no more bees in it. All there was a black tar substance. I tossed it in the trash and forgot about it, just happy it's gone. These two stories Allie and Jolene told me to mention. Stories about when we had just moved in. When we were all younger and had just moved to this house, we had a pink unicorn stuffed toy that was almost our size. Us girls were home alone with our brother, playing on the phone that we shared. We had a king-sized bed that all four of us girls slept on. Mari, being the oldest of us girls, slept on her own bed on the floor. Our pink unicorn was sitting in a small chair in the corner. It was my turn on the phone. I think we were playing Subway Surfers. Then Renee gasped and pointed to the stuffy. It just moved its leg. Us girls, being scared and intrigued, set up the phone, pointed it at the stuffy hit record, and ran out of the room. We waited about 5 minutes before asking Mari to go in and get the phone. We watched the recording as we were huddled on the corner of the couch. After 4 minutes, we started to think we were just being silly and that Renee hadn't seen anything. But in the last 20 seconds of the video, we watched in shock as the pink unicorn's right leg moved, followed by its left arm moving as well. Both had moved to the right. We screamed and ran downstairs to our brother's room in the basement and showed him the video. We begged him to get rid of it, and he did. By giving it to his sweet lab dog MJ as a new toy, she tore that thing to shreds. When we showed it to our mom and dad, they tried to convince us it had just shifted. We didn't believe them. My grandpa had asked what I've been writing, and I was reminded of another story that I'd like to share. My grandpa's room is across the hall from mine, and my grandpa was helping my brother with a few things in his new house. My brother asked me to watch his dog Black Lab MJ while he was getting everything ready. I didn't want her in my room because the last time I watched MJ, she chewed up my photo book. So, my brother put her in our grandpa's room after making sure she couldn't reach anything. All I needed to do was pop my head in the room and make sure she was okay with her food and water, and take her out to go potty every 2 hours. One night, my grandpa had to stay over at my brother's new house to help the moving van in the morning, meaning I would be watching MJ overnight and sleeping in my grandpa's room. My grandpa is a very heavy sleeper. The man has slept through earthquakes. But this one night, I woke up to the sound of knocking, and MJ sat up in the bed. I thought maybe it was already 5 a.m. and my mom was going to tell me to go upstairs and watch Alan. I yelled out, "Yeah!" and was about to tell my mom to wake up Renee because I had MJ. No one answered, and then I realized if my mom was knocking on Grandpa's door, she remembers I have MJ. Confused, I got up and opened the door. No one was there or even down the hallway. I popped my head into Renee's room to see if she was messing with me, but she was asleep. It couldn't be my sisters because I would have heard them going back up the stairs. When I got back to Grandpa's room, MJ was now sitting on the floor in front of my grandpa's bathroom. She must have wanted in there because that's where her food is. Thomas doesn't want her to have access to her food at night because then she'll need to go potty. She looked at me, then jumped up on my grandpa's bed again, ready to go back to sleep. I was about to get in the bed when I heard the knock again. This time I was more awake and realized with wide eyes it was coming from the bathroom. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed MJ off the bed and ran into my room, locking the door behind me and getting into my bed. After a while of laying in bed praying not to hear the knocking, aging, or worse, hearing it on my door, I was so exhausted and was finally able to fall asleep with MJ next to me. The next day around noon, my brother came to get MJ to bring her to her new home, unpack all his stuff, and relax after all the moving. I wasn't even mad when I woke up and saw that she had gotten into my trash and it was all over my room. I was just happy to not be in my grandpa's room. Thomas asked me how she was and I told him what happened. Thomas wasn't even surprised and told me he'd always gotten a weird vibe from that room. That was the real reason he didn't pick it when we moved in. He originally said he let Grandpa take it because he'd feel bad making Grandpa walk all the way upstairs to use the bathroom. Now I'm wondering if that knocking happens every night, and if my grandpa just sleeps through it. What is in that bathroom? This last story my sister suggested is going to be about the white Ram music box that was left here by the previous owners, and I don't blame them. Since the day we moved in, we've always had this white Ram music box, and since the day we moved in, we've never liked it. My mom got rid of it after 4 or 5 years of having it, thankfully. The reason my mom got rid of it is that it would randomly start to play, and it was the creepiest effing sound I'd ever heard. We looked at it multiple times and couldn't see anything wrong with it. No one would ever wind it up or mess with it. It would just start playing, and most of the time it would happen at the worst moment. If we were watching a horror movie, it would start to play. If we were playing hide and seek, it'd play when we were all quiet. If we were arguing, it'd interrupt us. Most of the time it would play when someone was alone. Like if we were just hanging out in the living room alone, it would start to play. It was like it was messing with us, like it loved when we were scared. I've had enough of this house and property. I'm trying to move out with my dog C, and it hasn't been easy. So is Renee and her dog M. So far, the best thing to do is try to ignore all the strange things. Just yesterday, we were all outside playing badminton and heard what sounded like a mix of a banshee screaming and a car trying to start. Our baby brother Alan was the only one to acknowledge it. Alan is like Thomas, or it could just be that he's young, but he always sees our grandpa, who passed away long before Alan was born, and our deceased pit bull, B. Alan is actually named after our grandpa, too. A part of me is creeped out by this, and the other part is happy that they aren't alone. Alan never sees just Grandpa or just B. He always sees them together. Alan also used to see something in the bathroom that would make him run away crying. Alan was still learning to talk at the time, but when he was able to and we would ask, he didn't remember. We used to have an American pit bull named B. He was an old dog and one of the most loving I've ever known. I'd gotten used to the routine of waking up, making coffee, and going on a walk with B. B and I would normally go up the driveway and back down, giving B just enough exercise in the morning but not enough to exhaust him. But one morning B started walking toward the woods and I decided to follow him. B looks very scary and even scarier when he's in a fight. B used to protect us kids from our old neighbor's dog when she'd get off her chain. The man didn't see anything wrong with his dog, even after my older brother got bit. She was just very aggressive and would attack anything and anyone with no reason. One day he was forced to put her down by the police because she had gotten off and attacked an elderly woman down the road who was now in the hospital. The dog was his ex-wife's and he had no love for the dog. We moved soon after that. As I followed B, I realized everything was quiet, and I mean way too quiet. B B stopped a little bit ahead of me, and I immediately felt like I was being watched. I looked around and didn't see anything. B was staring straight down the trail and was perfectly still. I didn't feel good about any of it, so I turned around and started walking back to the house, calling B to follow me. B was a very good and obedient dog. You never needed to tell him to do anything twice, and as we walked back to the house, B kept looking behind us. I felt something staring right at my back, and I started to walk a little faster. By the time I got to the house, I was running. I felt so bad for B, because the moment we got in the house, he laid down, but he kept his eyes on the front door. He was the best dog a family could have. We miss you, buddy. I have many, many more stories, but none that seem to be long enough to tell. Like the old lady's face we see in the dark corner of our parents' room, the baby handprints that will show up on Mari's mirror, the black-haired woman hanging in the shower that we see in the reflection of the bathroom mirror once a year, or the uneasy feeling of being watched at night from the windows. I don't know why this property has so much activity, and I don't know if I want the answer to that, or if I want to know what all of it is. I realize now why my parents ignore it all. I can't wait to leave this place.